In this lesson, we're going to discuss how we can use geometry with a texture to create our reference image planes. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and create a piece of geometry in my front view and paste my front image, reference image, onto it. So let's go ahead and actually maximize the front viewport. So I can do that with Alt and W. Okay, I'm going to go to my Create panel and use a plane, and we're going to apply a material to this, or a bitmap to this. So I'm just going to go ahead and just drag in a reference image or a plane. It doesn't matter about the size right now. And I'm going to go ahead and just right click to end that creation. Now, we do need to make sure that our size of our actual geometry matches the proportions of our image. So let's go ahead and actually bring up our folder with all of our images in there. And you'll see that the prepped front image is 1280 by 1280. And as a matter of fact, my other images are actually 1280 by 1280. Now, what I like to do is to make sure that my dimensions are 1-to-1. So 1280 by 1280, 1000 by 1000, or 200 by 200. It doesn't matter. I just want to make sure that they are 1-to-1 ratio. Okay, it just makes things so much easier. So let's go ahead and close that out. And let's go ahead and actually make this image right here 1-to-1, or this plane 1-to-1. So let's go to our Modify panel. And let's change our length and width, and I'm going to do just like 400 by 400. Okay, that was just a number that I pulled out of the air. It doesn't actually matter. You can make it 100 by 100, or you can make it 1000 by 1000. I normally like to make my reference images a little bit larger and my models a little bit larger because it's easier to navigate inside of 3ds Max. If they're too small, sometimes it's kind of hard to rotate around, and we get some weird clipping issues with cameras sometimes. So I find that this is a good place to be. Now, one thing that I want to do with this reference image is I want to go ahead and actually center it up inside of the viewport here. So I want to make sure that my Move tool is selected, and I'm going to change my X to 0, my Y is already at 0, and my Z to 0. Okay. Now, one thing that I want to make sure that I do is make sure that my length and my width segments are set 1-to-1. Okay, normally they'll be set to something like 4 by 4, and you can see the problem that we have here. Let's hit G on the keyboard to actually turn off our grid. You can see that we have edge faces turned on here. So if you don't have this, you can actually just go to Shaded and then turn on edge faces as well. And while we're modeling, normally I like to have edge faces on, and I want to see the edge faces on my actual model of my character, but I don't want to see them on my image plane. So that's why I go ahead and just take this down to 1-to-1. Okay, so now that's out of the way. Now, one more thing that I like to do to my geometry of my reference image planes is I like to change these to black, just because I think that's a nice clean look. If I get some weird colors, sometimes that can be a little distracting, especially when I don't have it selected. You can see that we have this black line on the outside of our geometry. So let's go ahead and actually apply our texture to our reference image geometry. So let's go to Material Editor, and I'm just going to drag in a standard material. Okay, I'm going to double click on Diffuse Color, and you'll see that it brings up our parameters here. And I'm going to use this Diffuse Color map shortcut. So let's just click on that and choose Bitmap, and this will bring up our images folder inside of 3ds Max. And let's go ahead and use our prepped front, seeing how we're actually in the front view. So let's make sure we use the correct image. Now, one thing that you need to do is go ahead and actually assign this to the geometry. So let's assign material to selection, and then we also want to make sure that we are actually showing the shaded material in the viewport. So now we can actually see our image in the viewport. Okay, so while we're here, let's go ahead and create another standard material. And if you have a preferred method of doing this, if you want to use like a multi-sub-object material, you can go ahead and do that. This is just my preferred method. So I'll go ahead and click on this new map and do the same steps that I did with the first one. So I'm going to go to Diffuse Color Map shortcut, choose Bitmap, and I'm going to choose my side. Okay, And I'm not going to actually assign this to anything just yet because I don't actually have that image ready. So let's just close our material editor for right now. I'm going to hit P on my keyboard, and this will take me to my perspective view. So I can actually rotate and orbit around, and you can see your material on this geometry. So we have an actual physical piece of geometry in our scene. Let's hit G on the keyboard in perspective, and you can see where we're at here. Now what I like to do is just go ahead and just make a complete clone of this reference image geometry. So I'll grab my rotate tool, and then I'm going to go ahead and hold down Shift, and with my snapping turned on, let's hold down Shift and rotate this 90 degrees, okay, in our Z direction. So we'll just make a copy of this, we'll hit OK, and now we'll bring up our materials, and we'll choose this material, we'll assign this, and then we want to make sure that we have that show map and viewport. Okay, let's close this out. And now we've actually got our image of our profile and our front. So the next thing to do is to go ahead and actually separate them so we can actually model from our images. So let's grab our move tool, and I like to move these out in their own direction. So with our profile, we're going to move it out in the X direction, okay? And with our front view, we're going to go ahead and move it back in the Y direction. Now let's take a look at what we've got in our perspective, or in our viewport. So let's hit Alt W, and let's go ahead and hit F on our keyboard here. We can see our front view. Here's my perspective. I can see all of those, and then here's my left view. Now in our left view, we need to go ahead and turn on shaded, and we can turn on edge faces here as well. Okay, and let's go ahead and get rid of the grid in both of these. Now whenever I'm modeling in my front and my left view, I need to make sure that I have this set up properly. Okay, so if I'm going to be modeling on my geometry in my front view, okay, I want to be able to look in my left view here and see my model as well. But the way I have it set up with my left view is this is what I'm looking at. So my model is going to be right in here, and it's going to be blocked by this image plane. Okay, so what I want to actually do is go ahead and select it and just move it to the other side. Okay, there we go. Now one thing to always note with your image planes is that they need to be facing the correct direction. So if your character's face is facing this direction, okay, your character's face in your profile should be facing the same direction. So basically what I mean is if he's facing this way, you're going to have some problems. Okay, so we always want the face to be facing in the same direction. Alright, so we've got our image planes in here. We've got those set up, and we might separate them a little bit more. Now notice that I can move this in my X direction, and you'll see how it's not changing anything in my left view. And that's because we're moving in this view's actual X direction. You can see X right here, there's no actual axis, and that's because it's basically coming out of the screen. Okay, so we won't actually see any change. And the same thing for our front view. If I move this in the Y, as you can see, Y is right here in the center. If I move this back and forth in the Y, we're not actually seeing any change in our front view. Alright, now one thing that I like to do before I begin modeling is I like to go ahead and select both of my reference planes, and I like to freeze them. Now before I can actually freeze them, I need to go ahead and turn off a couple of options. So let's go ahead and right click on our geometry with both of those selected, and let's go to Object Properties. Now inside of our Object Properties, we have this Show Frozen in Gray. So if I were to go ahead and freeze these, I wouldn't be able to see my image. So let's right click on it, and let's do Freeze Selection. You'll see that those turn gray, and I'm no longer able to see my images. So let's right click, unfreeze all, and let's select both of those again, right click, and go to Object Properties, and uncheck that Show Frozen in Gray. Okay. Now once we hit OK on this, and we can go ahead and right click and freeze selection. And now those are frozen. I'm no longer able to actually select them. Now you could go ahead and actually freeze them on their own layer if you want to do that. You're more than welcome to use layers to do that as well. Okay. So what we've done is we've gone ahead and we've shown you how to use geometry inside of 3ds Max and apply a texture and then use these reference images instead. Now again, the main advantage to using this method is that I'm able to actually go ahead and go to full screen, and I can switch to my front view and see my front view. I can switch to my left view and see that as well. So this allows me to actually work much, much faster. And this is actually my preferred method. So what we're going to do in our next lesson is we're going to go ahead and show you how to use animated viewport backgrounds in case you want to actually follow along with a video or an animated sequence to help you animate.